back to Linux Essentials. This is just going to be a quick course breakdown of how we're set up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into linuxacademy.com and let's take a look at this particular course layout. You'll notice that the course outline or syllabus here is broken down into the different weights and things that we need to know about Linux Essentials in order to pass the exam. So starting up at the very top, we're going to talk about the Linux community and a career within open source. So we're going to learn about things like the evolution of the operating system and other popular operating systems that Linux actually has similarities with. We'll talk about open source philosophy, different distributions or Linux flavors. We'll also talk about how Linux is used on embedded systems. Furthermore, we're going to talk about how and where to install Linux. In this particular section, we're going to talk about how to use the Linux Academy Linux Essentials lab servers, as well as how to install Linux CentOS 7 within a virtualized environment on our desktops. We're going to talk about major open source applications. We're going to understand open source software and how licensing works. We're going to talk about the ICT skills and working within Linux, such as desktop skills, learning how to get to the command line, and then speak about different industry uses of Linux, such as cloud computing and virtualization. In a big part of this course, we're going to talk about finding our way on a Linux system. This is going to cover a lot of different command lines that are split up into some short videos that build up into longer videos depending on what application or utility tool set that we learn about within this section. This is a very important one, so pay attention, and you may have to go over some of them a couple of times and practice on the lab servers that we make available to you here for free, as well as how to install it on your own environment if you so wish. We're going to learn how to get help within Linux. So we're going to learn about Linux man pages and the info pages. We're also going to learn how to search and look for things using locate and find. We're going to learn about how to use directories and list files and how to maneuver and move around, as well as creating, moving, and deleting those files. Under Power of the Command Line, we're going to talk about how to archive files and directories and learn a little bit more about compressing those directories and files as well. We're also going to learn how to extract and search data within files using different commands and input and output redirection. We're going to learn about regex, or in other words, regular expressions, which is very important to understand within the Linux environment. And we're going to learn how to actually turn specific commands that we learn earlier on within the course into actual scripts. We're going to talk about the Linux operating system in more general. We're going to talk about how to choose a particular Linux distribution, which would follow up with how the actual distribution life cycle, in other words, how long a Linux distribution would actually be available for support. And we're going to learn about the basics of hardware. Now, if you have no hardware experience, this is a great lesson because it not only talks about the different hardware that is available for PCs, but how that actually relates to a Linux operating system. We're going to talk about where our data is actually stored, in other words, the actual file system of a Linux server, as well as the kernel and what the kernel is. We're going to talk about networking, which is a very important set of different lessons. We're going to talk about the internet in general, how networking and routing works. We're going to talk about the domain name service and how a default gateway, in other words, our network router, works. And we're going to talk about how network configuration that's going to build upon the knowledge of networking and how that works within a Linux environment. We're going to also talk about security and file permissions, which is very important to understand, such as what the difference between a root and a standard user is, following that up with what a user ID is, and how to do user and group commands. In the latter of our lessons, we're going to learn about managing file permissions and their ownership. And at the very end of our lessons, we're going to learn about symbolic links, what they are, and how to use them, and then ending the course with what a sticky bit is. Now, you're going to notice that going throughout this course, we have different things set up, such as quizzes. I highly recommend that you go through the quizzes at least several times before you are ready to go take the exam. You should be getting a complete 100% pass every time before you go take that exam. Now, a lot of people ask, do we use the same quiz questions that you're going to find within the exam? No, we can't, for one reason and one reason only. This would violate NDA agreements with LPI. We cannot give the same exact questions in our quizzes that you're going to find on the exam. Another reason for that is that we don't believe in exam dump learning. In other words, we are passionate about you learning actual concepts that you can turn around and use on the job. Which brings me to the final thing, which is you're going to possibly come along exercises. Now, what exercises are meant for you to do is so that you could follow along real-world scenarios that solidify different ideas and concepts that you learn within the video lessons so that you have real-world examples of turning around and using those different commands within these exercises. Alright, so let's go ahead and finish this up and go ahead and jump into our lessons and learn about Linux Essentials.